The decision that killed Rome when money lost discipline for centuries. The Roman world moved at a rhythm that felt permanent. At dawn, merchants rolled open wooden shutters along stone streets polished, smooth by generations of footsteps. In the markets of Gaul, Syria, Africa, and Italia, the same coins passed from hand to hand, heavy, cold, and unmistakably real. Soldiers were paid in silver they could weigh. Taxes were collected in metal, grain, and labor. Contracts were sealed not with promises, but with substance. Money was not an idea. It was a physical expression of order. A Roman coin carried more than value. It carried authority. It carried memory. It carried the quiet threat that stood behind the empire's walls. To accept Roman money was to accept Roman law. To refuse it was to step outside the world Rome had built. And for a long time, this system worked. Not because Rome was perfect, but because it was disciplined. That discipline would not survive success. In the early Republic, Roman money was brutally honest. The denarius, Rome's most important coin, was struck from nearly pure silver. The metal came from mines in Spain, Illyria, and later Dacia, places conquered at great cost in blood and time. Every coin represented labor, risk, and control of land. To mint more money, Rome needed more silver. To get more silver, it needed more territory. To get more territory, it needed victory. Money forced restraint. When Rome spent too much, the treasury emptied. When it emptied, armies stalled. When armies stalled, expansion stopped. There was no escape from the equation. This created a natural limit on ambition, not a moral limit, a physical one. And for centuries, Rome lived inside that limit. As the Republic became an empire, everything expanded. Roads stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Armies no longer disbanded after wars. They became permanent institutions stationed on distant frontiers. Cities grew enormous. Rome itself passed 1 million inhabitants, a number no city would reach again for more than 1,000 years. This scale demanded constant payment. Grain had to be imported from Egypt and North Africa. Soldiers had to be paid whether there was war or not. Public games had to be staged. Bureaucrats had to be fed. Governors had to be bribed. Borders had to be defended even in peacetime. The empire had become a machine, and machines are expensive to keep running. For generations, conquest paid the bills. New lands brought new mines. New mines brought new silver. New silver paid new armies. But empires cannot expand forever. Eventually, the frontiers hardened. The easy victories ended. The mines grew deeper. The silver grew scarcer, and the costs kept rising. By the 1st century, Rome faced a problem it had never faced before. The expenses of empire were fixed. The income was not. Raising taxes caused unrest. Cutting spending weakened borders. Stopping games sparked riots. Every solution carried danger. The emperors needed money, but they needed it without consequences. And that is when the first small lie was told. At first, it barely registered. A denarius that once contained almost pure silver was mixed with a little copper. The weight stayed the same. The stamp stayed the same. The emperor's face still stared back with divine authority. To the public, nothing had changed. To the state, everything had changed. With slightly less silver, the mint could produce slightly more coins. More coins meant more wages paid, more debts settled, more problems postponed. The empire had discovered a secret. It could spend without earning. And once a system discovers that, it never goes back willingly. The second debasement was easier. So was the third. Each time, the silver content fell a little more. Each time, the mint produced a little more money. Each time, the pain was delayed. The emperors told themselves it was temporary, just until the next war, just until the next tax reform, just until the next conquest. But temporary decisions become permanent habits. By the 2nd century, the denarius had lost much of its silver. By the 3rd, it had lost almost all of it. Coins were now mostly copper, washed in silver to hide the truth. Rome was creating money out of nothing, not with paper, but with deception. And money remembers deception. Merchants noticed first. They weighed coins. They demanded more. Prices began to rise, slowly at first, then faster. Soldiers complained that their pay bought less. Farmers refused to sell for money that lost value between harvests. Trust, the invisible glue of empire, began to dissolve. And once trust weakens, force fills the gap. The emperors did not blame the money. They blamed the people, hoarders, speculators, foreigners. Merchants knew laws were written. Price controls were imposed. Punishments were announced. But you cannot command trust. Markets went underground. Trade shrank. Barter returned. The empire still had coins, but no one wanted them. Rome still had armies, but fewer soldiers believed in what they were defending. The collapse had begun, quietly. By the middle of the 3rd century, the Roman economy was no longer functioning. It was reacting. Prices rose not because merchants were greedy, but because money itself was shrinking. Every new coin carried less silver, less meaning, less promise. What had once been a reliable unit of account became a moving target. A price agreed in the morning could be a loss by evening. This is how inflation truly begins, not as a number on a chart, but as confusion in the mind. Merchants stopped posting prices. Farmers refused coins and demanded payment in grain, oil, or livestock. Soldiers demanded bonuses just to stay loyal. Tax collectors accepted whatever they could get and kept the rest. Money was still circulating, but it was no longer coordinating. And when money stops coordinating society, everything else must be enforced. Rome's leaders could have stopped. They could have reformed the currency. They could have cut spending. They could have faced the pain. But pain is politically expensive. Instead, they chose power. Edicts were issued fixing prices by law. Wages were frozen. Hoarding was punished. Merchants who charged too much were branded enemies of the state. It was the oldest mistake in economic history, confusing control with stability. Markets disappeared overnight. Goods vanished from stalls. Trade moved into back alleys and rural roads, beyond the reach of officials. The empire had declared war on reality. And reality does not surrender. In the year 284, a soldier named Diocletian seized the throne. He inherited an empire fracturing everywhere at once. The borders were unstable. The treasury was empty. The currency was broken. Loyalty had become something you bought, not commanded. Diocletian believed order could be restored through discipline. He reorganized the empire into smaller units. He doubled the bureaucracy. He restructured taxation. And he attempted to fix the economy with one sweeping decree. In 301, Diocletian issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, a document so long and detailed it listed the legal price of thousands of goods and services across the empire. It was an act of desperation disguised as confidence. The edict failed almost immediately. Prices ignored laws. Markets ignored threats. Trade vanished. Informers multiplied. Executions followed. And still, the money remained broken. As trust in money collapsed, trust in force replaced it. Legions were no longer loyal to Rome. They were loyal to generals who could pay them. Those generals became emperors, and emperors were overthrown as soon as the money ran out. The empire entered a cycle of civil war that fed on itself. Each new ruler debased the currency further to buy loyalty. Each debasement accelerated inflation. Each crisis required more force. Money was no longer a tool of order. It was fuel for chaos. Rome's great cities had been built on trade. When trade died, cities starved. Markets closed. Workshops shut down. Taxes became unbearable. The urban poor fled to the countryside, seeking protection under landowners who could offer food and security in exchange for labor. This was the birth of a new system, not planned, not chosen, forced by collapse. A world of contracts was becoming a world of obligations. Citizens were turning into dependents. Cities were turning into shells. Freedom was being traded for survival. By the late 3rd century, much of the empire had returned to barter. Taxes were paid in grain. Soldiers were fed with land. Officials were compensated with privileges instead of wages. Money still existed, but it was no longer central. When money dies, society simplifies. And simplification is not progress, it is retreat. Rome was retreating from complexity because complexity requires trust, and trust had been destroyed by the lie in the coin. The state tried one last fix. A new coin was introduced, purer and heavier, but the people no longer believed. They hoarded the good money and spent the bad. The old law returned with a vengeance. Bad money drives out good. Rome had lost its credibility, and credibility, once lost, cannot be legislated back. The debasement of Roman money did more than raise prices. It broke memory. People stopped thinking in long-term plans. Investments vanished. Families focused on survival instead of progress. The future shrank. And when the future shrinks, civilizations stop building. They start enduring. By the early 4th century, Rome still existed. Emperors were crowned. Coins were minted. Laws were written. Armies marched. The rituals of power continued as if nothing had changed, but the substance was gone. The empire that had once been a living system of trade, trust, and movement had become a shell. Roads were no longer repaired. Cities no longer grew. Commerce no longer flowed. Wealth no longer circulated. Everything that required coordination had slowed, then stopped. This is how civilizations die. Not with collapse, but with silence. Those who survived the breakdown adapted. Merchants became landowners. Citizens became dependents. Soldiers became protectors of territory rather than servants of the state. Local power replaced imperial power. Personal loyalty replaced law. People did not trust money anymore. They trusted relationships. And relationships are small. This is how empires shrink, not from invasion, but from internal retreat. Out of this collapse came something new. Land replaced currency. Obligation replaced contract. Protection replaced law. The Roman world, once bound together by coins and roads, began to fragment into thousands of small, self-sufficient units. This was the beginning of the feudal order. It was not designed, it was not chosen, it was survived, and it would last for centuries. For hundreds of years, Europe lived inside the echo of Rome. Stone buildings crumbled, literacy declined, trade routes vanished, cities shrank to villages, knowledge retreated into monasteries. The world became local again, slow again, fragile again. The speed of civilization had been reset, not by barbarians, but by a broken money system that made complexity impossible. Rome's fall is often told as a story of invasion, decadence, or corruption. But those were symptoms. The cause was simpler and more dangerous. Rome taught itself that it could spend without limits. The moment discipline left money, discipline left everything else. When money lies, it teaches society to lie. When money cheats, it teaches society to cheat. When money breaks, it takes order with it. The Roman collapse did not end history. It warned it. Every system that followed inherited the same temptation. Every empire faced the same choice. Every government discovered the same shortcut. And every time, the result was the same. Short-term relief, long-term decay, and a silence that lasted longer than anyone expected. Rome believed it was eternal. It believed its roads would last forever. Its laws would outlive kings. Its money would always be trusted. It was wrong. Not because Rome was weak, but because it believed discipline could be postponed. And discipline, once postponed, never returns on command. Somewhere in the soil of Europe, Roman coins still lie buried. They are blackened, worn, light in the hand. They once held the world together. Now they are relics, and they remind us of a truth. Every civilization learns too late. When money loses discipline, everything else eventually follows. This was the final mistake.